I am going to share some things I think are interesting. It's related to the work I've been doing. It's sort of an evolution and expansion of a lot of the kind of DevOps concepts. And I'm going to introduce some research that one of my coworkers is working on that I think is interesting. And I really revisited and reframed all of DevOps for the last decade through this lens. So with that, let's just plow. You've seen me before, so I won't necessarily tell my whole story today, but my background has really been focused on open source infrastructure automation, going back over 15 years now. My first commits in Puppet were 2004, worked on OpenStack, Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes. In parallel to that, I've been part of organizing DevOps Days since the very beginning, wrote some books, been part of other communities. And about 2 years ago, I started a new job at Red Hat. I'm going to talk a little bit about the investments Red Hat's making and the team they're letting me build. So Red Hat, also Twitter, if anyone uses Twitter, that's me. And this is a picture of my backyard. And this is my biggest beard during the pandemic. So I hope everyone's been safe. It's been a very interesting year and a half, but I'm getting by. This is the picture of my beard 2 days after I started at Red Hat. And this is a picture of my team that I was given investment to bring together. So this group is, I'm going to introduce a little bit about them because I'm going to use some of their ideas in this conversation. I was part of writing some of these books, but John Willis wrote the DevOps Handbook and Beyond the Phoenix Project. Kevin Bear wrote the Phoenix Project. And then last but not least, I'm going to also talk a little bit about Jabe's research. So Kevin Bear, John Willis, and Jabe are my core team at Red Hat as the transformation office. And Jabe, he often introduces himself as the least famous member of the team, but he's a PhD at Carnegie Mellon who's focused on how organizations, he's researching how organizations sort of change their behaviors over time to accommodate technology. And he introduced me to some language that I really love that I'm going to relate back to all the DevOps conversations we've been having. So we live in interesting times. There's a global pandemic. That's not what I had planned, but we're making the best of it. So this pandemic forced change on a lot of organizations. And lots of organizations had made all sorts of excuses about why you couldn't do certain things remotely, or you couldn't have, these kind of access to systems or what have you. But almost overnight, a lot of people were forced to do that. But we're still kind of stuck. And I'm not going to go through all the research today, but one of the most interesting things that I've been reading lately is the State of DevOps report from Puppet 2021. And the most interesting data to me is that you're seeing this mass of middle performing organizations that have made a lot of investments in DevOps. They've made investments over the course of 10 or not 10, but five or longer years, but they're still in kind of like middle performing organizations. And now there's all these other new buzzwords that are like related, or some of them are still old. We're listening to a serverless, and they're evolutions, but we still haven't solved this problem. And the problem that I'm going to get to, or the kind of this like notion of commenting, is hopefully interesting. So if you take any bit of advice from me, it's at some point people have to take actions, right? So it's like all the planning, all the words don't matter if people don't do the work. So here's what people really want instead of DevOps. And I think I shared slides like this before, so I won't belabor the point, but people want all these things: scalability, availability, reliability, operability, profitability, some other abilities. They want it all for free. And then this is the hard part, without changing anything. Right, and I'm almost positive I used slides like this before in Cairo. So here's the core problem that people resist changing, and this is like our opportunity as well. So the resistance to change might be more inevitable than the change, and what can we do about it? Because the thing that makes a lot of what DevOps is hard is you can't just have one person all of a sudden be DevOps, start doing DevOps. Like it doesn't help until it's that collective, until there's a group coordinating and expanding the workflows. So this is a very, very classic slide and presentation about dev and ops, traditional IT, and this sort of wall of confusion that organizational silos create between the dev and the ops roles. And this is where I'm going to start to introduce some of the stuff in a minute. So we create these systems. We don't communicate with each other except through tickets. That's dehumanizing, makes people unhappy, and maybe worse, right? So maybe there's some other mischief and some other things that happen that maybe aren't so nice. So these are different games, and this is where I'm going to start introducing Jabe's research. But you basically have two games that are being played, and those games, they're not unique to IT. This has to do with any kind of process, any kind of manufacturing or other process is not always going to have this core conflict, this tension between innovation and efficiency. So it's maybe a little bit oversimplified, but I'm going to say that this is really the core tension between dev and ops that plays out in organizations, is between that innovation and the efficiency or the consistency. And this is Jabe's PhD work, so I always try to give him credit for introducing me to this language and this idea. So oversimplified, we have this divide, wall of confusion, whatever you call it, between one side of the game is trying to create more value, create variability, innovation. The other side is trying to create more consistency, efficiency, drive down costs. And that plays out at the individual level and also at the organizational level. So you have these sort of tensions and conflicts between the business units who are trying to go fast, get things done, get into new markets, do things differently, create variation, and then the IT operations who has to bear the operational burden of that variation, who's trying to control the consumption and reduce the variation and do those things very efficiently and repeatedly. So this plays out in a lot of organizations. And so then this is just kind of like to characterize, and we don't necessarily need to go into all the details. Each one of these almost could be analyzed for as much time as we don't have today. But the differentiation economy is really about that innovation, creating the novelty, going very, very fast, while the scale economy is about reducing the variability and doing things in a repeatable manner and consolidating all those resources. So this is the core conflict that you have in any process. It's not unique to IT or anything. It's just the inherent conflict between innovation and efficiency. So this is what I will call this kind of core DevOps conflict that we play out. So this wall, the confusion, is because we don't understand the other side's game. In a lot of cases, we have a local understanding of what we're trying to do, but we don't always have good understanding of what the other side is doing or why they're doing it. And we don't understand how these things are connected and how no side can be successful without the other side also being successful. So is there a way to win both these games together? And is there a way to play a new game? This is again, Jay's research, but I think it's very interesting framing for a lot of the conversations that are happening. So this is what Jay calls the scope economy. And the scope economy is about connecting those two, the innovation and efficiency, by keeping promises to both sides with this shared platform in the middle that allows innovation and also allows operational efficiency without breaking the promises to either side. And this scope economy, you can call it a clutch or you can call it a fulcrum, is about balancing the needs of both sides of that and enabling both innovation and efficiency. And this is super abstract and academic, but I'm going to make it more and more concrete. So the scope economy, this middle platform, if you will, emerges from the ongoing negotiation between the selfish interest in favor of the collective interest. And the reason I love this language and the reason I kind of re-envisioned or reimagined lots of DevOps conversations back for the last 10 years is that it's one thing to talk about automation and technology is interesting and all that. And it's another thing to talk about culture, but it's about how those things come together, recognizing the selfish interests of a developer, the selfish interests of an operator to build that middle ground, that trading space in favor of our collective interests, right? So this is still super academic, but I'm going to try to make it more concrete as we go. So you see this over and over in organizations where you're optimizing for the developers, for the developer experience. And in a lot of cases, what you see is introducing a massive amount of variation. And in the worst cases, you'll see every single team has a different way to do pipelines. Every single team has different object models, different databases, different, whatever could be different that team can make a choice about will be different. And that is innovative, but it's not necessarily maximizing the value to the organization because it's creating a lot of operational burden for the organization, because you don't get any economies of scale out of the fact that you've got all that variation. And it might be more valuable to have someone recognize, either collectively or architect role or what have you, that those innovations would be more valuable being brought into that shared platform. And then you have the opposite also happen. So if this is out of balance either way, it's not as valuable as it could be. So you have organizations where things are overly restricted. There's a lot of regulation maybe. And so because of the organizational restrictions, you're not getting innovation. And you're limiting the innovation and the work that could be happening on the developer side because everything's so restricted. And it might be more valuable to recognize the level of risk and how you can keep promises about compliance in another way and bring those into this middle shared platform. So making it even more concrete, I think they're inspiring examples. I'm just going to read this. This is, I'll read it. So remove friction from product development, high trust, low process, no handoff between teams. Don't do your own undifferentiated heavy lifting. Use simple patterns automated by tooling. Self-service cloud makes impossible things instant. So this is not even my words. This is my friend, Adrian Cockcroft. When this talk was given in 2014. So Adrian had just left Netflix and was about to work on being a VC before he goes to Amazon. Now he's all focused on sustainability, but back in the day, he was talking about platforms and microservices and the rest of it. And this is a description to me of that kind of like capability that comes from having this really strong platform. And I'm going to argue that every cloud native company builds these shared platforms that are keeping promises, enabling innovation, but also keeping promises to the operational efficiency. And I'll argue that you literally could not build these kind of organizations. You couldn't deliver those kind of outcomes if you didn't solve this problem. If you enable anything out of balance, then you're going to limit both the innovation and the operational efficiency. So this is straight from the SRE book. I'll just read this. Or actually, I'll just read the bottom half. So the development teams can focus on the business logic because the framework already takes care of correct infrastructure use. So site reliability engineering, this is Google, in Google's own words, describing how SREs are building these solutions that keep promises to the infrastructure. And that's Google, in Google's own words, explaining how they built their shared platform. So if you know what Borg is, that's the container scheduling solution that emerged inside Google. That is a scope economy construct enabling these sort of platforms. Kubernetes is another example as the kind of evolution of Borg as an open source project, as another scope economy construct. I could talk to you all day about Kubernetes and some of the stuff we're doing with it. It's really fun. But to me, the highest performing teams come when you bring that Kubernetes potential and recognize the selfish interests on both the operator and developer side to build that platform. So if you get something that's very, very focused on the operators, they believe they'll build it and the developers will come, like the developers won't come. You have to bring the developers into that conversation. So this is another like mind-blowing thing for me, or I like thinking about it as a philosophical thing, that you have this open source global community creating this platform or a local platform for these organizational scope economy constructs. And then if you're familiar with the SRE language, the service level objective, which I also believe I introduced at least once or twice in Cairo, the service level objective is literally a commenting. If you go read the book and understand how the service level objectives are negotiated, it is a negotiation between the SREs, who are effectively Google operations, and the software engineers and the business. So here's the three economic games. You have the differentiation economy trying to create innovation. You have the scope economy, that's that platform, connecting to the scale economy, which is about the operational efficiency. And you win these games different ways. So you win differentiation by creating more new things. You win the scale economy by creating more efficiency. And the more reuse and sharing that you have across an organization, then the more powerful that scope economy platform will become to your organization. So the holy grail, the thing we want to get to is this: developers can create new things, self-service access to those resources that's facilitated by the constraints that platform keeps to enable the reliable compute networking and storage infrastructure. This is another Carnegie Mellon PhD, and I'm just throwing him credit for the language. So a lot of the recommoning and common language comes from his PhD work. And when he talks about platforms, he's not even talking about technology. He's just talking about really goes back to the commons and like this notion of how resources are managed and recognizing ways to do that and have these conversations. So the platform for him is about that binary relationship where you have the ability to negotiate the selfish interests in favor of the collective interests. So coming to the end of this, and then I'm going to start a new thread, is this recommoning process of understanding the nature of the resources you're managing and the nature of the innovation you're trying to create. And then through that collective negotiation, determine the appropriate things that should be represented in that platform, and then transitioning those things that are most valuable into the platform. So this is the traditional IT wall of confusion as a separator between developers and operators. Recommoning is about bringing everything into that middle thing and maximizing the value through the negotiation of the selfish interests in favor of the collective interests. So this is, I kind of already mentioned this, but I think it's interesting to point out the State of DevOps report, which you can go read. At some point in the middle of this, it turns into a bit of an advertisement for the team topologies book and some of the interesting stuff that really relates to the platform conversation that I'm making right now. But I also want to point out one of the things that I thought was interesting is that 62% of the organizations that are stuck in this middle evolution and not becoming high performing have made significant investments in automation and report high levels of automation. So DevOps, not just automation, you got to get that human aspect involved. So getting beyond Dev and Ops, there's more to this story. And this is like, let's say you have solved this problem, like what's your next problem? This is kind of related to the work that I'm doing day to day right now. So this is what I call the 5 failures. This is sort of like related to people, organizations making investments in digital transformation and trying to drive greater outcomes. So the first failure is what I call leadership failure. This is where the leadership is not prepared for working in a new way and might actively undermine those new ways of working. There's a product failure where you've made investments in the technology and new ways of working, but you don't have a good way to validate the strategies, the hypothesis of what you're going to build, and maybe it doesn't connect to anything valuable. You see a lot of investments in vanity websites and mobile apps that come from this kind of failure. Then there's a development failure. This is the center of kind of agile conversation. It's this combination of communication and technology skills that if you have requirements that are meaningful, can you deliver those features? Then there's an architectural failure. And this is like where it all comes together in some ways for me and it's sort of sad to me that Agile set up architecture as a bit of a villain in some of the early Agile conversations. But at a certain scope and a certain scale, if you don't understand how to think about reliability, scalability, latency, a bunch of these other qualities from kind of a numerical perspective, and even if you have the right features and you can't keep all those other promises about the system, then you're going to have a hard time. And that connects, last but not least, to operational excellence and being able to keep these systems running. And I will argue that operational excellence is the defining advantage of the true cloud natives. So with that in mind, most organizations have these roles, they have these titles, like there's always developers, there's always operators as roles, but really think hard about your organization and what are the true capabilities. So just because you have the titles doesn't mean that you're particularly good at it. And then the way that I try to help our organizations, our customers maximize their investment, and it's not just about DevOps, it's about getting those outcomes, is really thinking about these as opportunities. So you have that executive sponsorship that you prevent the leadership failure by really promoting new ways of working. You have a model for managing and thinking about validating those strategic requirements for what you're trying to build. And then this is the last three is kind of like the sweet spot for the DevOps conversation. You have that development capability to build the right features. You have the architectural capability to make doing the right thing easy, make that platform emerge with all the promises to both sides. And then you have that operational excellence to build those systems and keep them going. So this is coming towards the end. We have this sort of thought leadery way to represent these. So I set up the differentiation and scale economy, the innovation and efficiency is on the horizontal. Then you can think about tactical and strategic in terms of time scale. So the most tactical thing that happens in any organization is operations. So you have to be responsive on a moment by moment basis to keep those systems running. That's the most tactical thing that happens. Development is a tactical investment in innovation. And that is hour by hour decisions that developers are making are going to have an impact on the organization. Then you have strategic investments in efficiency that are the architecture, and you have the strategic investments in innovation, which is really that product strategy. And then the way I think of this, and like if I had a longer talk, or I came back just to talk about this, is like if those get out of balance with each other, what are the problems that you have? Like if you just optimize for development, how does it cause problems for these others, or vice versa? But the more leadership you have, then think of that as this 3D thing coming out. The more you have, the more you can have of everything else and still keep it all in balance. So that's kind of coming to the end. And just to close, and this is similar to lots of other conversations I've had about DevOps, is that it's not a technical problem. DevOps is not a technical problem. The rest of this is not a technical problem. It's also not really a people problem, although people are involved. And that is the opportunity, is to recognize that what we're trying to solve is a socio-technical system. Those organizations that are high performing and delivering the outcomes that we're seeing with the technology are about bringing the technology and the people together and solving those simultaneously. So you have to solve both of those together. And coming to the very home stretch, DevOps is not a team. I think I said that kind of thing before, and I'm not the only one who says that. DevOps is not a tool. DevOps is not a project. Like I get into organizations all the time and they're like, we implemented DevOps. And it's like, you're not done. It's never done. DevOps is about resolving conflict. So going back to this language that I introduced today about that ongoing negotiation between the selfish interest in favor of the collective interest, resolving our conflicts in favor of our collective interests. So DevOps is resolving conflicts in favor of our collective interests. Shukran jazeelan.